Skeen went inside and saw a paper towel that had been tossed to the floor. It was red with blood. A wash basin also bore streaks of blood. That was where the man had washed his hands before taking the time to pray. When he came back out into the hallway, he saw that Clara had left the group and was inching toward the literary agent's open door. Skeen said sharply, "Do not go in there, Clara. Go back to the office and call Lieutenant Raggio and Lieutenant Donovan, too, if he's in. They'll want to see this. And call my wife. Tell her I'll be very late for dinner." Clara stared at him for a moment, then nodded and silently obeyed him. Skeen asked the tenants, "Did none of you hear anything? Miss Juliet is dead, killed by this man. There must have been a racket, sounds of a fight." Everyone in the group shook his head. The insurance man, Robert Bain, said, "I was having an argument with a lady who fainted, a very loud one, and the walls are thick between my office and Miss Juliet's. I'm sorry, but I heard nothing. She could have been having a wedding reception in there, and I wouldn't have heard it." There was a groan in the back of the group. The lady who had fainted was beginning to recover. Skeen leaned against the wall opposite the unconscious Arab. "Will someone help that woman up? Get her some water." "You know I always come running when I hear you shot another unarmed citizen," said Lieutenant Emmanuel Raggio, a homicide detective from the Hall of Justice Skeen had worked with before. "Your thoughtfulness has always been appreciated," replied Skeen. They stood in the center of a milling crowd of policemen, spectators, and newspaper reporters. Lieutenant Manny Raggio was an otherwise nondescript man in his mid-40s with a growing paunch and a sweep of unkempt black hair. There was a prominent mole on the left side of his mouth and a permanent red blotch on his right cheek. His piercing black eyes were his only redeeming features. Skeen guessed that he had all but given up on his appearance. He had dealt with Raggio in the past, the last time during the Fiona Nesbitt Dongbani case. Raggio had arrived with his partner, Sergeant Paul Barnes, just moments after a half-squad of uniformed policemen had answered the insurance man's call. He stood with Skeen over the still unconscious form of Amsali Mahfouz. "So it's a story here. I was leaving for the day and saw him praying down the hall a bit. I didn't like the looks of him." Wait a minute. Raggio interrupted gruffly. "What do you mean, he was praying?" Skeen said that he was going to have trouble explaining Mahfouz and his religion. "He's an Arab. He was submitting to Allah." "Oh." "Look," said Skeen, "see the victim first. Then I'll explain why I think this guy killed her." "All right," said Raggio, "but I'm not in a vaudevillian mood today." "When are you?" Skeen led the lieutenant into Juliet's office. Raggio took one look at the woman's body and turned away. "Oh, Christ!" he exclaimed. Sergeant Barnes came in then, holding the dagger and a handkerchief. "Lieutenant, I found this knife. It's covered in blood." The officer stopped short when he saw the body. He dropped the dagger, held a hand up to his mouth, turned, and spotted the restroom and ran for it. Raggio went to a uniformed sergeant. "Find a telephone, call the hall and ask for the medical examiner on duty and a photographer and an ambulance. Make it 2 ambulances. One for the body and one for this wop on the floor." He pointed to another officer. You start taking statements from the people here." Skeen heard woofing sounds coming from the restroom. He said, "Make sure Sergeant Barnes doesn't disturb anything in the restroom. There's blood in there, too." Raggio gave him a wry look and drafted another officer for the task. Back in Juliet's office, he found the woman's overcoat on a coat rack. He covered her with it. Skeen noted that his hands were shaking. He glanced down at the floor and picked up the dagger Barnes had dropped. He asked, "Is everything as you found it here?" "I closed her eyes, that's all," said Skeen. "What about Sleeping Beauty out there?" Skeen shrugged. "He attacked me. I shot him in his left kneecap, then his right wrist. He wouldn't stop shouting Arabic cuss words at me, so I gave him some cold English." Raggio grimaced. "So, while we're waiting for the doctor and the photographer, shine a light on this praying business for me." Skeen lit an old gold. He stepped into the hallway and began describing what had happened.